Well, good morning, everyone. This is William Davis. I'm the Director of Education for Wilson Daniels. And we are about to go live with Charlie Mount, who is the Managing Director of Royal Tokai in Hungary. So thanks for everybody joining us on this Thursday morning. Looks like Charlie is about to get on here in just a moment. So we will give him a chance to connect from London, where he is at his offices. So let me do a quick background here, and then we will get Charlie on the phone. So it looks like Charlie's coming in. And
hey, well,
Charlie,
hello,
Charlie, how are you, my friend?
Very well, very well.
Glad to hear it. So, looks like things are delightful on the other side of the pond.
Yes, I'm sorry I'm not in Hungary. It's a bit tricky traveling at the moment, but it's quite good. I think they're happy. I sometimes get in the way during the harvest. So they're working away over there, and I'm leaving them in peace.
That's quite all right. I'm sorry I'm not in Hungary either.
We'll have you back soon, I hope.
We shall do that. We need another long weekend in Budapest and spending some time in the Northeast.
Absolutely.
So really, thanks again for taking the time and talking through some of the wines and getting into a little bit of the history of Royal Tokai and the region, because you know how it is. We've had a chance to spend a lot of time around one another, and we've always discussed in many ways, just the different winemaking styles and what makes Tokai unique. But I think for people to really understand Tokai as a region, they need to really get an understanding of the history and the background, because I think in many ways that makes it not only unique, but not only in the realm of dessert wines, but also in winemaking as a whole. So you want to run us through and give us a little bit of history, from
Sure.
15th to 1600s.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Well, I mean, it's a great photo you've got up there, actually, because it really it shows sort of several of the key aspects of the region. You'll see very clearly in the background of the thing you've got up a very clear conical volcano shape, and that's the Tokai Hill. So the history really starts a few million years ago, when it wouldn't have been a fun place to be, because there were 406 active volcanoes, each one spewing out different combinations of minerals, and those individual volcanoes now are the single vineyards we work with, and we're going to talk about later. It's probable that the Romans brought vines to the region, but there have been fossilized vine leaves of nearly a million years old discovered in the region. So grapes have been there for a while. Tokai, as we know it now, really the story was starting in the 1500s. Now, it's always frustrating when you talk about the history of a wine region. No one ever thought the first time they made Tokayasu to write it down and say, look, we've made this incredible sweet wine. We know from mentions in the 1500s that the wine was around, and some of the earliest mentions of Tokayasu are in people's last will and testament, where they would give their Tokayasu to their descendants. So the wines were certainly being made in the early 1500s. And it was a very different time. I wasn't around myself, but I think we could all agree it was very different. And it was a time of alchemy. This was a time when people believed in this kind of magic, the search for the philosopher's stone, turning base metals into gold. And Tokai, with its incredible golden color, it really caught people's imagination. Paracelsus, one of the early, very famous alchemists, actually spent quite a lot of time in the region trying to work out how these grapes were capable of extracting gold from the soils. Now, much as I love you, I wouldn't be sitting here now if we did actually extract gold from the soils. But you can understand the excitement. And the other thing is sugar. You know, sweet wines, it's hard to say. Perhaps the first botrytized sweet wines were made in Germany. Perhaps they were made in Tokai. It could be either. But sugar was very sought after. Only the truly wealthy could afford sugar. In a complete reversal of where we are now, if you were wealthy, you would be very pale skinned because you didn't have to go outside and work in the fields. And if you were wealthy, you would be fat because you could afford to eat. And if you were wealthy, you would have black teeth because you could afford to buy sugar. So if you wanted to pretend that you were well off, you would whiten your face and you would blacken your teeth. So sugar was very exciting. And the sweetness of these wines was truly astounding. And Hungary saw the value of this. And the ruler of Hungary, Prince Rákóczi, essentially controlled the entire vineyard area of Tokai with his friendly aristocrats. And it was sent around the world. It was one of the first wines that was truly internationally appreciated. Our friends across the pond in America were some of the first to enjoy it. Ferment was planted at Monticello, and it was shipped. Some of the oldest bottles, actually the oldest bottle, 1769, of Tokayasu I've had was bottled for a New York wine merchant. So it's been a long history. Things went a little bit wrong in the 20th century for reasons you may understand. Hungary has an unhappy knack of picking the wrong side in pretty much every conflict. And it came out of the Second World War. On the losing side, it was under communism for a long time, and all of these individual estates, all of these incredible winemaking knowledge, centuries of knowledge, were lost under communism. Everything was confiscated. All wine, with the exception of a very small amount for family use, was made by the state. So to bring us up to 1990, the fall of communism in Hungary, Royal Tokai was the first outside investors to establish a private winery. So we are the oldest private winery, continuously operating private winery in Tokai, but we only go back to 1990. Our cellars, where these wines were aged, were first carved out of the hills in the 13th century. Oh, you're good at this. There we go. There are the cellars. So it's a long history. I mean, we, since 1990, have had to relearn a lot of the techniques, but equally we're trying to honor the incredible vineyards, the incredible climate, the incredible terroir we have by making the best wines we possibly can. And if that means using temperature-controlled stainless steel, if it means using everything we possibly can to do justice to these incredible grapes, we will. So I would say now that the wines I'm going to talk about today, 2016, are the best wines which have ever been made in this region in its incredibly long history, because we understand more now. We can translate what is happening in the vineyards into the bottle without any distractions, without anything else. It's pure. It's very clean, and it really harnesses the incredible grapes we're working with.
You know, it's funny that you bring up, again, the concept of millions of years of history and all of that possibly being lost overnight as a result of, human interaction and conflicts. Because, it's funny when we, think about those regions that are driven by, activity. Specifically in wine regions.
Mm.
And generally now, most people, most sons or buyers, well, what are these regions that are driven by volcanic activity? And only too often it's going to be Etna. These regions that are driven by active volcanoes, rather than some of those that are really less known. In the way of basalt. That you might find from, Columbia Gorge, or, some of the ancient volcanoes that you might have found in Italy, specifically in Suave.
Mm.
But never have you found, a region that's driven by volcanic activity and those Zemplin plains and the mountains as you run up into Transylvania, with the history of grape growing that you have in this area?
It's a magical place to work. I mean, you can stand on the top of the hill of San Tomasz where that photo was taken, and you can see the Great Hungarian Plain. But you're surrounded by these, they're not impressive volcanoes. They don't even look that scary now. But what's fascinating is the minerality. Even on the slope of one volcano, you will find very different mineral combinations in the soil. But when you have, like I say, 406 of them, every single one is different. And it's one of the joys of wine. It's not just in volcanic regions, but that being able to step from one vineyard to another and see the change in the soil is truly incredible. I think what has amazed me most in Tokaji is that at the levels of sweetness that we're operating at with the Azu wines, you can still have very clear terroir characteristics. One might have thought, and certainly I thought many years ago, that it would be very hard to express that in sweet wines. But it really is. And the three single vineyards we're releasing now, the Measures Mai, Bedjek, and New Lazu, are always so distinct. And it comes right back to the minerals which were thrown out those millions of years ago.
Well, it's funny that, again, when you bring that up, when we talk about the difficulties of expressing terroir, once you get above a specific RF level, right? The minute that you get to a ripeness or residual sugar, then you tend to lose some of that. And I think that's what makes ours so unique. It's because of the winemaking process. So, of course, everybody can see a diagram here. Walk us through this. What makes this different than Sauterre or any other region around the world?
So as you know, as everyone watching knows, there are different ways of making sweet wine, different ways of concentrating the sugars. Ice wine, the water is removed. Some of the wines in Italy, the grapes are picked and then dried, and that concentrates the sugar. What botrytis does is very special. It allows water to escape from the grape, but it also creates new flavor compounds and new chemical compounds. Botrycine is a lovely little thing, which in the lab it works like penicillin. So perhaps some of the health benefit stories of Tokaji from the olden days are true. But as botrytis is essentially it doesn't break the skin, but it allows water to escape through the skin. So the grapes shrivel. And for that shriveling to take place, you want to have moving air to carry away the moisture. You want sunshine to help dry the grapes. The difference, I think, between ourselves and Sauterre, which are two of the most famous areas for botrytized wine, is the level of drying. So in Sauterre, they will pass through the vineyards many times, and they will pick individual grapes just as we do. The grapes they're picking have lost about 50% of their mass. So the water has gone away. So everything within a grape in Sauterre that's harvested is double concentrated. 50% has gone. So the sugar is twice the amount in a healthy grape. The acidity is twice the amount. Those grapes are taken and then pressed. In Tokaji, we're looking for about 80% of the mass of the grape to have gone. So everything in these little shriveled berries that we called azu berries or dried berries is concentrated by a factor of 5. So the sugar's 5 times higher than a normal grape. The acidity is 5 times higher than a normal grape. The flavor compounds are 5 times higher. But unlike in Sauterre, we cannot press these grapes. You have yourself held a handful of azu berries. It's like holding a handful of raisins. If you squeeze them, nothing comes out. So in Tokaji, the process is very different. Those grapes are picked by hand, and then they're macerated in a base wine to bring out those incredible flavors, sugar, and acidity. It's the only way of getting anything out of them, because by themselves, there's practically no juice. It's said historically, again, no one knows, but where we are, many invading armies passed through. And one of the legends is that one year everyone had to run to the hills, and when they came back to the vineyards, grapes are shriveled and rotten. Now they're beautiful to us, but they don't necessarily look very beautiful. But they had to make wine, so they added them to the wine of the year before and created this golden liquid. So we picked those azu berries. We're doing it now by hand. It's incredibly labor intensive. So far this harvest, we have picked 2.7 tons of azu berries at an average of just under 5 kilos per person per day. So we are very happy if our guys come back from the fields with 5 kilos of grapes. To give you an idea, that's, you know, a couple of double handfuls of grapes after a day's picking. We're quite fussy about what they bring in. To me, that's along the lines of, you know, someone that's a forester for mushrooms. The amount that it requires to, you know, to find truffles or mushrooms in the hills or in the forest. It's no different than the amount of labor that's required to pull off making these wines. And you're moving throughout the vineyard to do that. You know, some vines will give you nothing. Some vines will give you maybe 2 berries. You have to keep going. It's backbreaking work. It's hard work, but I hope you'll agree it's worth it when you taste the wines.
Yeah, for anyone that's never tried the wines, and I presume that everyone that's listening or chiming in have had some experience with the Royal Tokai wines. If you're not tasting these wines and haven't really delved into the region, in many ways you're doing yourselves, unfortunately, a disservice. You know, and it's kind of sad to see. So, you know, let's talk a little bit about, you know, post 1990. You know, with the fall of communism, how did Royal Tokai come to be?
So, really, we owe everything to a gentleman called Hugh Johnson. Now, I certainly have several of his books at home. I'm sure most people who are interested in wine at least have the World Atlas of Wine. And Hugh, the first World Atlas of Wine came out in the 70s, and he traveled extensively, obviously researching it. And one of the places, obviously, he was aware of was Tokai. And the first time he went there in the late 70s, it was hard to imagine why this region had been so famous. But he kept thinking about it. And then when in 89 it became apparent that communism was leaving, he came over to Tokai, and he essentially he stood up in the town hall in our little village of Mad, which is down sort of almost bang in the center of this map you've got up here. And he stood up and did a classic I have a dream speech. And he persuaded foreign investors to back him, and he persuaded 62 small growers to essentially donate a hectare of their land. He didn't have a winery at that time. I don't know why my screen keeps on going dark. He didn't have a winery at that time, but he found a gentleman called Istvan Sepsi, and the Sepsi family certainly have been making azu wine since the 1600s. And Istvan Sepsi was the first general manager who made the wines, but it was sort of fumbling around in the dark because the wines made under communism had been made really to generate hard currency. Sweetness was.
Looks like we got you on a little bit of a buffer there. So let's see if you bounce. There you go. The joys of communicating.
Yeah, it's weird. It was actually. It went to sleep. My phone went to sleep. So we had to really start to investigate how the wines were made. We were very much helped by our vineyard manager, Deju Potoki, whose family under communism had been making their own wines for home consumption. He had a great understanding. I don't know why my phone keeps wanting to go to sleep. He had a great understanding of the wines, but we were learning, and I don't think it's really and we started off using what we understood to be the way of doing it. So dry base wine, long maceration. Initially, we were doing it in open skips, so quite an oxidative style of winemaking. Since 2000, we now use a fermenting must at about 4 to 5 degrees of alcohol. We do the maceration with the azu berries in the press. We feel that takes about 24 hours. We're constantly monitoring it, but we feel that withdraws the best flavors from these wonderful azu berries, and it gives us a much cleaner and much purer style. We've since the beginning we've had a huge amount of support from the trade and from critics around the world. But like any great wine producer, there's no resting on laurels. You want to be able to say that every vintage is your best vintage. Now, one of the particular challenges we face is how often or how seldom we can actually have an azu harvest. I would love to be in Ikem's shoes. Ikem miss, I think, one vintage in every 20. We are very happy if we have 6 vintages out of 10. It's not every year you can go out and have the conditions for azu berries. So the 2016, which we're launching, follows on from the 2013. So it's probably a relief to you and everyone watching that we only have this chat sort of once every 3 years if we're lucky. I actually joined in 2011 and I thought I'd cursed the company because we made wine in 2009. We made no azu wine in 2010 or 2011 or 2012. Delighted when 13 came along. That was a great vintage, but then nothing in 14, nothing in 15. It's hard work. So, we're still learning, but we don't have quite as many vintages. We don't have a vintage every year to learn from. But I think the style we're making now, like I said, our job is to do justice to these incredible vineyards. I think we're doing it now.
So we actually just had a question that came through from Alan. Thanks for in terms of the farmers back in 1990, 1992, 1993. How did the farmers donate, quote unquote, the hectares to the winery?
So we would work with them. Initially, it was effectively as part of a cooperative deal. And then over time, we bought them out. Now, there are some great producers in Tokai now. We're very happy that we have a peer group who are also pushing for quality all the time. One of the differences is that the Hungarian state, as I mentioned, decided that it could allow private ownership again. And it tended to package up estates and sell them. So most of our peers, such as Oremus, which is owned by Vega Sicilia, or Dishnoko, which is owned by AXA, are single estates which were sold as a single block. Because of the way we started, we ended up with land all over the place. Now, from an admin point of view, that makes things very difficult. We're working across the region. But from being able to express the qualities of different sites within the region, it's a huge advantage. So Dishnoko can only work with the Dishnoko vineyard. Oremus can only work with the Oremus estate. We own land in many of the first growths from the original early 1700s classification. And it allows us to express more styles, I would suggest. It's not better, not worse.
No, and it's actually it's good that you mentioned that, because if you think about it, and us looking at the map here, Oremus is up in the far northeast, not too far from Saroshkata Pekapali. I think that I pronounce that as well as any non-Hungarian good, non-Magyar good. And much in the same way with Dishnoko, just being, there located between the villages of Tokai, Tarkal, and Mad. And that's one thing that I've always noticed about the wines from Royal Tokai, is that they show a greater understanding and a typicity of Tokai as a region, which then allows you to then delve into the crus, the growths, as a singular expression of the terroirs that you might find. Now, you talked about how difficult it is to make azu, and one of the big running themes, especially in Tokai, are the challenges of having fewer azu vintages, and a lot of that is due to climate change and global warming. So what's the winery doing to help combat or to address some of those concerns?
I think In terms of climate change, wine regions are great places to look because they tend to have a memory of the weather because it's their business, you know. I remember when I worked at Champagne Krug, Olivier had 7 generations of his family had written down the conditions in every vintage. It's a little harder for us because of that break. So we do not have great records of vintages prior to 1990, and no one in the region really does. So we, over that very short period, are not seeing changes. The not being able to make the wine every year is not necessarily because of extreme weather, it's more because of inconvenient weather. We need really specific conditions. You know, we have the 2 rivers, the Tisza and the Bodrog, which we hope will create morning mists. You need humidity for botrytis to start. But then you hope for something almost completely opposite. You want those mists to burn off and you want the air to start moving. In our short history from 1990, our strike rate of 6 years out of 10 has stayed the same. Having said that, last vintage was the earliest vintage we've had. This year is actually going to be quite a late vintage. We're picking now. I anticipate we'll be picking through into 2nd or 3rd week of November, if everything goes well. Having said that, you know, we and others in the region do what we can to minimize our impact. If you come to the winery, you'll see the solar panels, you'll see our water retention, collection, purification, reuse system. You'll see the green roofs we have. I'm desperate to build a croquet lawn on one of the green roofs, but apparently it might be dangerous playing croquet 15 meters up in the sky. So we're working on all of these things and we'll continue to do so. And you'll be familiar from other producers that you work with that the EU, through its subsidy programs, is also doing a great deal to encourage sustainable practices in the vineyards, and they have very specific criteria for their subsidy applications. So I think it's like everyone. Well, I think everyone should always be able to say we can do more, and we will continue to try and find ways of doing more. But we haven't yet, in terms of climate, again over that short period, seen a change in the number of successful vintages we have. In France, certainly, I think what really brought it home to French politicians was the suggestion that, you know, in a few decades, the best Pinot Noir might come from Scotland rather than Burgundy. And I think that really perked them up a little bit and they decided to take some action.
Yeah. I don't think they want to be going to Airside to find their Pinot Noir. No. It's a little ways away from Burgundy. Yeah. Now, with the current vintages, let's talk a little bit about what made the 16 vintage so special. Walk us through what happened there, compared to vintages like 2013 or 2008, other strong vintages for Royal Tokaji in the region.
Yeah, I think, like I said, you want a combination of factors. It doesn't really matter what's happening in January. Tokaji, we get very extreme weather. I remember 2012 in centigrade, the coldest in the vineyard was -26. The warmest in the vineyard was +42 degrees centigrade. It's okay. Vines can handle cold weather. We went down to -10 in January of 2016, but the vines are fine. They're sleeping. What you do want is a good spring, a good flower. We had all of that. And then the fruit set, but then going into summer, we had a lovely summer. But then in September, we had a good dose of rain as well. And rain, we want moisture. As I said, we want moisture coming up. It helps the botrytis. But it came at a sort of perfect time. So because we're going to have the shriveling, we hope, if the conditions are good, it's okay to have a bit of moisture, which sort of delays the ripening, because if we can maintain acidity in the grapes for as long as possible, it's fantastic. It also gave us the chance to go through the vineyards on several occasions. So we've had some problems if you take vintages we didn't make. 2014, we had one generation of Azu. We were picking maybe 2 kilos per person per day. That wasn't enough to make any wine. But in 2016, we were able to go through on several occasions, but we still had this wonderful acidity. And I think that is Tokai's raison d'etre, its acidity. Some people, when they say they don't like sweet wines, what they don't like is rich flabbiness. If you have acidity, and all chefs know this, as long as your acidity is there, you can tolerate whatever level of sugar. I tasted these wines last week, immediately after Ikem 2018. Now, for us, Ikem is quite a dry wine. It's 145, I think the most ever in 2018, 145 grams per litre of sugar. That's effectively a dry wine for us. But the acidity is very different. So any good Tokai Azu, and these are all very good Tokai Azu, should be lip smacking. I love it when I do tastings with people. You cannot stop your body doing it. Your reaction when you drink these wines is you cannot help yourself, because the acidity that we're working with, while the sugar is higher than Sauterne, the acidity is 2 or 3 times higher. So you get freshness. And I think that's my favorite thing about the 2016s, that the acidity is pucker, is fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, tasting through the 2016, the Saint Thomas, and I'm really intrigued as to the overall quality, because you're mentioning in this not only last week but yesterday when we were on the chat, the gold label. The blend of the different the blend of the different grows. Okay. I think that the gold label might well be one of the, if not the best value, compared to something like the Vineyard Select, the dry ferment. Over the past couple of years, it's the one that really surprised me, because I think the first time that I ever tried the gold label was when I bought a bottle in Hungary, and it was of the 11 vintage. Mm-hmm. Remember, because it was only available in Europe.
We had 25 barrels. That was it, yeah.
And you tasted this 2011 gold label. You're like, my God, there's something, there's something greater than the sum of the parts, especially in some of those smaller Aussie vintages. But in a vintage like 2016, it just has to be incredible.
So what we do for the gold label, actually, I'll start with like most serious producers, we harvest every vineyard separately. It's slightly more complicated for us because we're picking the shriveled Azu berries, but we also need healthy berries. So the picture you have up here, we'll probably take 3 of those shriveled ones, and we'll take all of the healthy ones as well for the base wine. So if you're drinking a single vineyard Azu, like let's say New Azu, the macerating liquid and the Azu berries have come from the same vineyard. So we'll keep everything separate. And then they go down to our cellars to age. So prior to bottling, we're tasting every barrel. So New Azu, we had off the top, so we had about 3 barrels of New Azu. We actually had 1 more, and we taste them. But in order to be bottled as New Azu or bottled as Measures Mai, it has to scream, this is the vineyard I come from. There's no point doing it otherwise. But the test used to be, when I started, if idiot non-Hungarian me could tell blind that it came from a certain vineyard, it was obvious enough to bottle as a single vineyard. If it wasn't, it would be blended back to gold label. So gold label in my mind, and again, I often think in champagne terms, gold label to me is like Dom Perignon. It's working with the very best vineyards in the region to express the very best of the region in a particular year. Whereas New Azu, Saint Thomas is like Cru Clos du Menhir. It's the very best of a particular site. One is not better than the other, but the gold label, again, it's working with the very best vineyards, and it's expressing Tokai. It's actually in the 16s. It's the sweetest of all of them. It's just under 190 grams per litre of sugar. It's the one I have in the glass here. But because the acidity is just fantastic, I've written down a number here. 11 is the grams per litre of acidity. It's so fresh. It's astounding, and luckily we can make a little bit more of it than the single vineyards, which are, if we're lucky, a few thousand bottles.
So with the gold label and the 2016, what single vineyards, what growths went into the gold label?
I'm not actually going to tell you.
Okay.
Well, for several reasons. Partly because it means we may have not done our best on one of the single vineyards. So all of one of the single vineyards, which perhaps is missing, went into the gold label. But I don't want to spoil the mystique by telling you. Essentially, it's the best vineyards in the region have gone in there. I wish we could have bottled more of the gold label as particularly one of the single vineyards, but sadly we couldn't. I know it's our fault. It's just, if you think about these azu berries when they're coming in, they're so intense. They're actually really quite difficult to work out. You can tell the sugar level. You could look at them if they've got the right sort of purplish color, jamminess. It's great, but for whatever reason, they don't always pick up the site from which they come as one would hope. So I think from the fact that we had one barrel of Santa Mash, you might guess that originally there perhaps were a few other barrels of Santa Mash, which were not Santa Mashy to make the final cut. But on the upside, it's a decent bottle. And as I said to you yesterday, when I tasted the 2018 Akem, I was surrounded by, I think there were 4 masters of wine. There was Neil Martin, and we moved straight onto the gold label. And the feeling in the room was poor Akem. This was a very unfair thing to do to it, because instantly you're moving to a wine of concentration. And Neil's just published his notes on Akem, and he's obviously published his notes on gold label. You read the two and tell me which really gets his juices flowing. Because these wines done right, they get your juices flowing. That's why they're served as aperitif in Hungary. Seriously, that zesty acidity, you have a sip, juices are flowing, you're ready to go.
Right. And, I think that added acidity also brings another component of food pairing that we don't necessarily see with other botrytis affected wines or dessert wines from around the world. It's like, you feel like, you're still very much, you're in this very narrow window of different cuisines or dishes to pair. It's like, yeah, well, I get to do foie with sauterne, but you can do foie with Tokaji and then pretty much anything else on the table due to the acidity with the ferment.
Yeah. My number one pick at the moment with the gold label is roast pork. It's just, when you get that fatty, well-cooked pork, the crackling, the skin, pour a bit of the wine on top of there, just make it nice and salty and sugary, sticky, salty, fatty, magnificent. It cuts very well. And then you've got the classics, the various cheeses that work very well, the blue cheeses. I'm just going to mention one other thing, because the picture you've got up actually sort of prompted me to think about it. What you'll see on the picture is this wonderful white fluffy mold on the walls of the cellar, and this is it's actually a combination of several different molds, but it feeds on the alcohol. You've heard the same stories in Scotland at the whiskey distilleries, and it performs a role in terms of climate control. The humidity at that bit where you're looking is going to be about 94-95%. The temperature is going to, throughout the year, operate in a sort of 2-degree band around 12 degrees. And the mold really helps that. And I've been having really fascinating conversations recently about whether the mold is part of the terroir of Tokai. And I really think it is. It doesn't impart any flavor compounds, but if you aged these wines anywhere else, they would taste very different. And terroir is a bit of a nebulous concept, perhaps. We always talk about the vineyards, but I think there is a very strong case to be made that mold is part of the unique Tokai terroir. Certainly, we were terrified after 2009. We didn't have any wine to put down there. The mold had nothing to feed on. It disappeared. And we were delighted when in 2013. We put wine down there and it came straight back. Yeah, sorry, I digressed. But
No, no, no. I truly, I think that that's fascinating, because it does bring you know, the secondary questions of the concept of terroir. We discuss indigenous yeasts all the time, but we never really discuss the indigenous molds that you will find. You know, we talk about those being, you know, present in wineries, but not necessarily in the cellars.
And I think it's difficult to test, but and we're not going to send our barrels to age anywhere else, but they would not turn out the same. You mentioned yeast. I should probably mention we give yeast a very hard job, particularly with our Essentia, which is, you know, some of it's dripping at 850 grams per liter of sugar. Yeast struggles at that sort of level. In fact, for all of our wines, we use a yeast which was originally discovered in our cellars, but is now cultured for us. So it's an indigenous yeast, but we do not use spontaneous fermentation. We found a yeast we love. We found it in our cellars. We want to keep it, and it can deal with these pretty inimical conditions, such as incredibly high sugar levels, and it churns away and it does a job. But these are all, you know, they all come out about 10.5% alcohol by the time they're bottled, so you can drink a lot of them.
So after the gold label, we have, do you have the Neolaccio or the Betcheck?
So I'm going to go New Lazu next. I'm going to hold up three here. So we have New Lazu, Betcheck, and I have Measures Mai here as well. So New Lazu is one of the volcanoes. Essentially, you know, it's good betting if you see a name on a vineyard in Tokaji. It's the name of a volcano. New Lazu is a little hill just outside Mad. The name means a good place to catch hares or rabbits. Hungary, Newell. I still, after
only in Hungary.
Yeah, so it's a good place to catch hares. And you do see them jumping around over there. And New Lazu it's volcanic soil, obviously, and it's got a sort of brown forest soil on top of it. We make, and in the original classification, it was one of the, classified as one of the first growths of the region. So it's, I think, what in all of these wines I get some common themes. Each bottle, one of my favorite smells in the world, actually. Each bottle is covered in beeswax at the top, and when we're bottling and we're dipping, it's all done by hand. You have a meter squared vat of beeswax which fills the air with a heavenly aroma. And New Lazu in particular, I think, on the nose, you also have that wonderful sort of beeswax aroma. It's slightly savory, and I love having savory in sweet wines, and I think you should. I think there's salinity there, and then you have the sort of classic notes. You have that sort of quince or quince juice, a little bit of sort of dried apricot. A lot of the flavors here are the sort of the secondary aromas where apricot has become dried apricot. Lemon has become sort of candied lemon.
Yeah, it's you know, tasting the Neolazzo, and many people in the United States haven't had a chance to try this growth because it's very rare for us to receive, you know, this. I think the last vintage that we received, the Neolazzo, was the '08. I think that was the last time we saw it in the market. So
I must apologize for that. It wasn't my decision as well. But
no. It's totally fine. It's, you know, it's just, you know, that's why I think that it's such a special addition to our luxury offering this year, is to have the Neolazzo, you know, as an alternative, because only too often when people have been introduced to the wines initially, at least for the classified growth, they always think of the Saint-Amand, Measures Mai, and the Betcheck. But to have the Neolazzo or the Bierschalmers, you know, in some of these other vintages, you know, it makes things a little bit more special, and allows you to see the terroir and some of the characteristics of the wines. To me, the Nielata, when I tasted it, it was a prettier, a more feminine example than some of the other, some of the other wines, especially Santa Masha Becek. Those wines tend to be a little stronger, a little denser, a little bit more, structured in just their sheer power and the way that they come at you in that initial and secondary attack.
One of my predecessors, not me, decided that New Lazu was far too hard for an American to pronounce, so they sent it elsewhere. I think it was incredibly unfair, and we've now revoked that decision. But I mean, bear in mind, so it was a wonderful harvest. It was not a big harvest. So if you combine all of our single vineyards together, we produced less than 12,000 bottles, and they're small bottles. I have a chart which I sometimes use in the US, which compares our average annual production with the big boys at DRC. And it does make them look relatively common, the amount they make. But New Lazu, we had 2,347 50 CL bottles. A couple fewer now, obviously. But what I'm loving, and we've just gone out with our offer in other markets, and we pretty much sold out today actually, but there are people now who've chosen their favorite and are following their favorite through the vintages, and New Lazu is part of the story, and we will continue to ship what we can from the US from now on.
Well, thank you for doing that. I'll never say no to having access to this. It's an amazing growth. It's a lot of fun, and the price of the Nielata is, I believe it is line price with the Becek.
It is
around the same price.
Yeah, and these wines were once the most expensive wines in the world. Thomas Jefferson, there's a note he wrote to his merchant in Paris about his latest order. And he's talking about the Tokaji Azu, and he essentially says, it had better be bloody good, because I've never paid this much for a wine before. Hugh Johnson has a collection of wine lists from Paris restaurants at the turn of the 20th century, and you would find Tokaji Azu was priced at 4 times Haut-Brion. Now we haven't, and we're not going to try and catch up again. I think our pricing is, for the quality, is remarkably fair. We're not greedy.
No, again, for the amount of work that goes into this, the overall yields compared to what you'd find from a first growth Bordeaux, or even some of the cult Cabernets that are coming from the United States and around the world, it is a bargain. But don't forget, I mean, we're not on this earth for a very long period of time. If we've noticed anything in trends, I have a feeling that in 50 or 75 years, the proliferation of sweet wines is being in fashion. It's only a matter of time where it'll rejoin the ranks in the same way that it did 100 years ago.
Yeah. I think these ones, there are so few, and I like the fact actually that I know a lot of the people who are buying these wines personally. I know they're buying them to enjoy. They're not buying them to sit on and hope that they appreciate in value. And again, with this limited number of bottles, it will never be greater than that, and that's when we make it. So yeah, the Becek, we had 2 500-litre barrels of Becek, which is the next one. So we ended up making just over 1,000 litres, 1,991 bottles of the Becek. Becek was the first one I learned to always detect blind, because for me, so Becek, again, it's volcanic, but there's a lot of quartz, there's a lot of rhyolite in the soils, and you tend to get a lot of spice, particularly in my experience, a sort of cracked black pepper, which again, it's that sort of talking about savory and sweet again. And that's how I always detect Becek. Also, Becek is the only one of the single vineyards where we have harsh Levallois planted alongside Furmond. So harsh Levallois is the sort of second grape of the region. The name means linden leaf in English. And it's very sort of delicate and floral grape variety. But it's another reason I think why the Becek is so distinctive. So it's
Right.
that spice. There's wax again. It's almost sort of lanolin-y, candle waxy. I love this. I mean, this is the vineyard that I follow probably the most.
And it's funny that you talked about, there being a black pepper component. When you look at the soil of Becek, with those black flakes with the rhyolite, it almost looks like, these flakes of black pepper in the soil that you don't find in, in the Los in either Meches Mai or in those, kind of iron oxide, those red notes in Saint Tomas or Nilat.
Yeah. I'm pairing it with cigars at the moment. That's my pairing. Becek and a Partagas Serie D number 4, or Coiba Behike.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, and so you've got the Meches Mai to close us out.
Yeah, so Meches Mai is it's good actually. It takes us right round to the beginning again. So when the first classification was done, it was done in the early 1700s by Fritz Riccardi, and he sent his men out, just like 150 years ago they went out in Bordeaux, and they looked at they tasted the wines, they looked at the prices that they traded at, and Meches Mai was named one of the 2 great first growths. And I think at that time it was because sweetness was prized above all else. So Meches Mai is right at the south of the region. It's where the hills rise up from the Great Plain, and over millennia, wind-blown soil from the Great Plains has left a very deep layer of loess soil in Meches Mai. Meches Mai, the name means honey pot, and that is what the wine is. However, this is my favourite Meches Mai ever, because it's always golden and luscious and honeyed. But in 16, this is the highest acidity we've ever had in Meches Mai. So we're up at 11 here on the acidity. And what that means is, alongside that incredible richness, it tends to be the richest of all of the vineyards. You also have that acidity as well. But Meches Mai, it's just golden, it's luscious, it's mouth coating, but then it lifts right at the end with the acidity. And here again, we're 1,135 minus 1 bottles of Meches Mai.
1,134 bottles. Great.
Yeah. And also we're keeping a few. One of the shames is that we don't have a very, like I said, pre-1990, we don't have any wine. No one has any wine other than that was made by the state. So we are building up our own library. So I'm being very greedy and holding a lot of wine back. So of the 1,134 bottles, we're keeping a fair proportion back at the winery for ourselves, really. We don't make these wines to make money. We make these wines because it's the oldest classification in the world, and it's our duty, really, to make these wines. And we're the only people who do.
Well, here's to the labor of love. So with just a couple of minutes left before we have to get off, if anyone happen to have any questions, any comments that they'd like to ask Charlie, now's the time to do that. Because, we don't get a chance to walk through the wines of Royal Tokai too often. And so it's great to have him, in his happy hour afternoon with a cigar, talking to us about the history and the background of the winery and the region. So,
speaking of the background, I've just noticed I have a cartoon of your current president on the wall behind me. See that? It's it's a very good wine magazine called Noble Rot.
Yes.
So this was their Make Wine Not War edition. You'll recognise both of those chaps, North Korean chap, American chap. Make wine, not war.
Well, if there's one thing that wine does, it brings us together.
Well, I've got a horrible feeling both of those people are teetotal. So that's not a good thing.
Neither is non-alcoholic wine.
Apart from Essentia, I'm sure I've got some lying around. I also have here, I don't think even you have ever had this.
Oh.
This is a Palinka made from our 2017 Azu berry paste. It's essentially a grappa.
Yes, it is. And for anyone that's never tried a Palinka, make sure that you've got plenty of crackers, a lot of food to go with it. Because after a bottle of Palinka, you might find yourself in an alley somewhere in Budapest the following morning. It's powerful, heady stuff.
It is
but
indeed.
It's a lot of fun to drink. So, any chance that we'll be able to see some of that in the market, or is that going to be for family and friends?
I think it's unlikely. I'm not sure we even make it legally. So, so I don't think we'll be shipping it anywhere in the near future.
There you go. Research and development. Well, Charlie, thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast. I hope to see you soon. I hope that everyone is safe in London and in your neck of the woods, and that the doing well. I know that it'll only be a matter of time before we'll get a chance to see each other, and fly around the States a couple of more times.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to having a glass together with you, William, and Ege Chegadre.
All right.
Thank you very much, man.
Thanks, my friend, and thanks for everybody for chiming in. Check us out on future installments on the TV and the Wilson Daniels Instagram page. So stay safe out there. Cheers, and see you soon.
Cheers.